So today I'm going to talk about the today I'm going to talk about the BRSR specific aspects, and probably towards the end of the session, in the last 10 minutes, we will take up some questions. So let me share the screen with you. Yeah, let me know once you can somebody confirm if you can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Just a
yes, we can
second.
see.
Okay. I'm putting it into a full screen. Yeah. So I'll give you the background of the regulations, and then we'll talk about the SEBI regulation, and then some of the specific aspects on the BRSR core. So this is how the BRSR has been evolved in terms of the timeline. December 2015, SEBI, the markets regulator for India, has mandated top 500 listed company to develop business responsibility reporting as part of the annual report. So this was in December 2015, and then in November 2019, SEBI extended the report, the BRR requirement, to the top 1,000 companies. And then in May 2020-21, SEBI made it applicable to the top 1,000 listed company on a voluntary basis. So I don't know how many of you have seen, but if some of you have seen the BRSR reporting, which was on voluntary basis, you will see the companies were publishing the BRSR on a voluntary basis. Some of the companies were also getting it assurance report, limited assurance by a expert who would be anyone like engineer or anyone who's a subject matter expert assuring the BRSR report. But one peculiar thing which I have noted in the BRSR report on a voluntary basis, many companies were giving notes at the end of each of the section explaining their approach. So, for example, if they're preparing the consolidated BRSR, so the explanation was that which components have been included or which components have not been included, or what is the measurement basis that have been followed by the companies. So you can download some of the reports which have been given by and now since we are sitting in now in 2024, it's better to refer to the published report for 2023. I'm sure you can look at the listed companies, the top 10 few listed companies, and download the BRSR report. So in June 2023, SEBI mandated the business responsibility and sustainability reporting to the top 1,000 companies based on market capitalization. So this is based on the market capitalization as on the last day of the financial year. So if I talk about 2024, one can say that you will have to look at the market capitalization on the last financial year, date of the last financial year. So one can say it could be 31st March 2024, so one has to refer to the SEBI regulation to look at the market capitalization. However, there has been a lot of discussion around this, and therefore SEBI has released a consultation paper. So you can check on the SEBI website. So they are issuing a very detailed amendment to for the determination of the market capitalization for the applicability of the BRSR reporting. So this is a development which is happening, and once SEBI releases, some more clarification and the date, so one has to be careful in terms of how to determine this top 1,000 listed companies for reporting of the mandatory BRSR by these companies. 23-24, so there was a circular issued in July 2024 and July 23, and therein they said that now assurance is mandatory. So Indian regulator or the India is the first country wherein reasonable assurance has been mandated for the top 150 listed companies. Now, when I say India is the first country, why? Because if you look at around the globe, none of the countries have mandated reasonable assurance in the manner in which Indian regulator has mandated. So this is the applicability glide path starting from 22-23. So they mandated for the first time the reporting by the companies. So this is the reporting by the companies. They mandated for the top 1,000 companies. Assurance was not mandatory for the year 22-23. However, for 23-24, reasonable assurance on the BRSR core became mandatory for the top 150 companies. And then gradually they're extending to 1,000 listed companies. How? So they are saying in next year, which is your 24-25, reasonable assurance will be mandatory for the top 250 companies. For 25-26, it will be mandatory for the top 500 companies, and 26-27, it is going to be mandatory for the top 1,000 companies. I'll also cover in a separate slide on the mandatory disclosure and the assurance for the value chain entities. Now, value chain entities is a concept which is very different and peculiar for this kind of a engagement, because here your customers, your suppliers will be covered when it comes to reporting, which means the companies will have to gear up for providing that additional reporting, getting the information from their suppliers, from the customer, as well as assurance provider will also have to gear up for understanding how to get that information, how whether the assurance will be provided by any other assurance provider for that supplier or customer, or whether the main assurance provider for the company will have to give the assurance report for such suppliers or customers. So that is applicable later on, and I'll share it in the another slide. This slide gives you a broad overview of the BRSR overview, which talks about the 3 reporting sections. So if you look at the BRSR report, it is important to note that they have made further amendments to the BRSR format through the circular dated July 23. So what you will see now in the published BRSR report and for the March 2023, the amendments have been made, which means companies will have to make additional disclosure for March 2024 and so on, 2024 onwards. And why these amendments were made? Because to make sure that it is aligned with the BRSR code. And when I say BRSR core is a set of KPIs, some 46 to 49 KPIs on which assurance needs to be given by an assurance provider. So what SEBI did, they looked into first of all, which KPIs on which assurance is required to be given. And basis that, they have amended the BRSR, for which the companies will have to make the disclosure. Overall, if you look at BRSR has 3 reporting sections: general disclosure, management and processes, principle-wise performance. And these principles are further divided into essential indicators and leadership indicators. And also, if you see, they have taken some literature and guidance and the policies from the GRI, Global Reporting Initiative. So when you will do a deep dive in terms of what is the requirement, and if you have applied GRI or the integrated reporting or the other TCFD recommendations at the standard, you will see that it is not something which is totally new or which you have not seen. These are the 9 principles which are very, very important for you to understand. And as you can see here, the dark gray ones are the environment ones, black ones are the social parameters, and the lighter ones, gray ones, are the governance ones. So starting from integrity and ethics, they talk about sustainable products. So whether the product is sustainable, which is manufactured by the company, whether it's possible to reuse, recycle this, and it's how the company deals with the disposal of such products. Employee well-being, what kind of initiatives being taken by the company? There could be a requirement to even give the amount to spend on the employee well-being. Stakeholder interest. So who are your stakeholders? It is very, very important. So who are your key stakeholders, and how the consultations happens between stakeholders and board? Human rights. What about the assessment of human rights? Environment, this is something, the E part is very, very important. And here comes the expertise of the subject matter, because here you need that element, you need that expertise, how to measure. For example, how will you measure the energy consumption, or how will you measure the water consumption, water withdrawal, or the water discharge? Air and GHG emission, this is also split into scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, which is again requires some expertise. For example, scope 1 is your direct emission, which is what is the carbon emission or your carbon footprint when you are using when you're booking a flight or when you are taking a vehicle for commuting to office. Scope 2 is when you are booking it, or is what is done at the company level. So on the scope 3, which is very indirect and very, very difficult to measure. So you will see in some of the countries, the assurance has been mandated on a scope 1 and scope 2. And even in India, BRSR, if you see, they have only mandated assurance for a scope 1 and a scope 2. Scope 3 emission, GHG emission is not mandatory when it comes to assurance. But when it comes to disclosure, it is mandatory. So company will have to give the disclosure for a scope 1 emission, scope 2 emission, and the scope 3 emission. Public policy, I think this is, I'm sure you would have read and familiar in terms of what are the policies, how those policies are advocated, are they available on the website of the company? inclusive growth. So CSR project is one thing which everyone is aware of because of the requirement in Section 135 of the Companies Act, and how the social impact assessment has been carried out. And then you have the 9 principle of cybersecurity, data privacy, data breaches. So is there a policy in the company as to how they deal with these matters? How do they address the consumer complaints? And in terms of data breaches, how many instances did the company noted for data privacy or data breaches or cybersecurity matters, and how they have dealt with it? So this is a larger framework for your 9 principle, which you should be aware of when you're working on any kind of BRSR engagement, or whether you are working as part of the company, you're helping them in preparation of the BRSR report, or you're working as a company, you're part of that sustainability team, or you're working as an assurance provider. Then also you need to have a detailed understanding of these principles. Now I'll do a bit of, I'll just highlight few of the important things which were there in the SEBI circular. So as I said, BRSR core is a subset of BRSR. So as of now, SEBI has not asked you as an assurance provider to provide assurance on the entire BRSR. They have only mandated assurance on selected attributes which are covered in these 9 principles. That includes the cross reference to the BRSR. So the BRSR code, which you can see in the slide, and maybe if I can just show you, it's open. I've kept it open for you. Yeah. So this is how the format of BRSR code looks like. Like for example, they have given reference here. So the first attribute is greenhouse gas footprint. So they've given greenhouse gas emission may be measured in accordance with the greenhouse gas protocol. Total scope 1 emission, scope 2 emission. How do you measure it? You have to measure it in MT, KT, MT, the units in which measurement is required. The broader assurance and data approach, this may not be sufficient. Let me put a caveat here. They have given this broader data and assurance approach, but reasonable assurance is a much higher level of assurance, and I'll cover a little later in my presentation. But yeah, this is as a minimum they have given. How do you measure that? And then cross-reference to the BRSR. The entire BRSR report is what the company will put together, or the company will be required to include as part of the annual report. And they have given a cross-reference, principle 6, question 7 of the essential indicators. So they have given a cross-reference. And this is the format of the BRSR, which is very much available on the SEBI website. You can go through it. This is how it looks like. General disclosure, details of the listed entity. And then you can see it is running into 41 pages. So it's a very, very detailed information which is required by the company. A very important point which I would like to highlight here, it says reporting boundary. Now, this is also something which you need to understand. The SEBI, there is a guidance note also, guidance note on BRSR, which is there on the SEBI website. It says that the company has a choice whether they want to prepare this BRSR information on a standalone basis, which means only for the entity or the company, the top 1,000 listed company, or on a consolidated basis, which means the company as a group put together. And when you say group, it says that all the entities which are part of your consolidated financial statements, which means you will have to look into the consolidated financial statement and all the entities which have been included, whether it's a subsidiary, associate, or joint venture, that has to be included as part of the reporting, as part of the consolidated BRSR. So as of now, this is optional. Whatever the company selects or decides, that has to be disclosed by the company. And then it has to be the name of the assurance provider to be given, type of assurance. Obviously, since SEBI has not given any choice here. So if it's a top 150 for March 24, then it's reasonable assurance. But if any company is getting a voluntary assurance, let's say limited assurance, then it has to be here written limited assurance. And then you will see the details. They ask for the details of products, services, operations, and many other details. Turnover rate for permanent employees and worker. Another very important point which I would like to highlight in this format, in many cases, they're asking information for even past 3 years. So what you need to start thinking is, it's not just the information for March 24. The companies will be requiring the information for the previous year as well. So in some cases, they have only asked for the information for 2 years. And in some cases, they've asked for information for 3 years. So turnover rate in current year, previous financial year, and in the year prior to the previous financial year. So see, in this complaint grievances on any of the principles. So the 9 principle which you have seen, so any complaint if received on any of the principles, then the company will have to collate that information and will have to provide here for the current financial year as well as for the previous financial year, which means the company should have complete data for the previous year as well when they're reporting for March 2024. So this is on the broad BRSR, and this is, leadership, and which you can have a look. And I will strongly suggest for you to look into the annual report published on the website of the listed companies and see the completed BRSR report. So going back to my presentation, yeah. Yeah. So moving further, value chain. So if you remember, I mentioned about the value chain entities. So SEBI BRSR circular defines value chain entities. How it is defined? It is defined as value chain shall encompass the top, upstream, and downstream partners of a listed entity, cumulatively comprising 75% of its purchase, sales by value, respectively. So they have given this framework, how to identify your value chain entity. You have to consider your 75% of your purchase sales and then determine the entities. And if you see, the disclosure is mandatory for the companies for top 250 companies from 24-25, which means next financial year, not 24, but 24-25. So the companies still have a year to plan how to get that information collated for the value chain entities. So company will have to get the communication maybe as part of their getting suppliers on board or customers on board. They will have to initiate a policy around it because they will be requiring the information on BRSR core for all these suppliers and customers basis their purchase and sales value. So the companies need to gear up for providing that information as part of their annual report. And the assurance provider will be required to get hold of that information and giving the assurance from a 1 year later on, which means 25-26. However, for the value chain entities, limited assurance and BRSR core is required on comply or explain basis, and it is mandatory for the top 250 companies. So if you see, they have not mandated reasonable assurance for the value chain entities because value chain entities are unlike your components. They do not have, the company may not have control or significant influence or even any equity interest in that because they are your customers and suppliers. So this is on the value chain entities, which is and surprisingly, this is something the guidance is not there. So if you see in none of the standards, so even the new standard which has come up, the ISSA exposure draft on sustainability assurance, that also has a very, very limited guidance on the assurance of the value chain entities. So, so hopefully the regulator or the standard maker should be able to issue some guidance before this gets triggered into in terms of the assurance. Some of the FAQs in which SEBI circular has included, and I'll cover the important ones. So it is profession agnostic. So if you see, the SEBI has also taken the same path taken at the global level, at the international level. It is profession agnostic. Now who will appoint the assurance provider? That has to be decided by the board. So the board has to make sure that the assurance provider has the necessary competence in terms of the subject matter as well as the assurance skill. Sorry, I can hear some.
अभी तक 4 से 5 एक मीटिंग ये चल रहा है presentation.
Sorry, can you please put yourself on mute? Yeah. Yeah, so statutory auditor can provide, internal auditor cannot provide, and they have set up very high standards for the independence. So effectively, the SEBI circular and the FAQs state that the assurance provider should be independent and should not be providing any of the non-audit services to the listed entity or to its group entities. So insurance provider or any of its associate do not sell its product or provide any non-audit, non-assurance related services, including consulting services to the listed entity. So before accepting an assurance engagement, please check on the side of the non-audit services on the independence. And in terms of the standards, SEBI has not mandated any standard. However, they have given reference to the global standard, which is your ISA 3000 or the ICA standard SSA 3000. So whichever standard is being used in the assurance report, that has to be indicated explicitly, clearly in your assurance report. So if you see, ISA 3000 is one of the standard which is being used globally. So if you will search for the reports which are available on the net, you will see lots of assurance report being issued at the across the globe by using ISA 3000. Yeah. So this slide is more on your core, BRSR core, which is a subset of BRSR. And this is something on which assurance is required to be provided, reasonable assurance from this year, 2024 onwards. So BRSR core framework requires entities to obtain reasonable assurance for the data provided under 30 parameters. And I've just summarized this for your reference under 9 ESG focus areas. So one is your GHG footprint, scope 1 and 2 emissions and intensity. Second is change in your water footprint, energy footprint. And then you have the embracing circularity, breakup of waste management, how the entity is managing the waste, employee well-being and safety. They have specifically asked for some details like how much percentage of revenue is being spent on the employee well-being, gender diversity, percentage of wages paid to women, inclusive development, which means is the company investing in the MSMEs? Are there job creation opportunities in a small town? Fair engagement with customers and suppliers, number of days of accounts payable and instances involving loss, breach of data of customer, and openness of business, conducting business with concentrated limited parties along with investments and loans made to related parties. Now, some of the information may be factual. You may see that it's a factual, but each and every information needs to be checked when it comes to providing a reasonable assurance in more detail. Also, some of the information may be coming from the financial, from the books of account, for example, loans and investment made to related parties, or the information related to trade payables. So that information you will have to get from the financial statement. Maybe you may have to coordinate with through the management with the financial statement auditor. Because if you see, the timelines are different. So if you see the BRSR reporting timeline by the companies is September by the within whatever 6 months of your annual. So it has to be with the annual report, which the timeline has to be as per the Companies Act. Whereas if you see the financial statement timelines for the listed companies, it is within 60 days of the close of the financial year. So which means by the time the company may prepare the BRSR report and may ask for the reasonable assurance, the financial statement would have been finalized, which means the underlying books of accounts would have been audited. So this is on your BRSR core. And this is a very broad overview of the assurance approach. But again, this is not something, which is a benchmark or anything, but it's more of illustrative. And I thought maybe I'll just, produce it for a minute or two for your reference. So for example, you will have to understand which KPIs you need to assure, which means in this case, BRSR core, what kind of assurance strategy to be planned. So for example, which sites to be covered, which locations to be covered, what is going to be the team size, how you're going to plan the engagement. If the company is preparing it on a group level, then you will have to think about the group policies, maybe issuing the group instructions, how the company is doing the consolidation. Then you will have to look at the review of the published information, is what kind of information company has published as part of the annual report. Issuance of the assurance statement, which is the key deliverable, and then whatever the meeting with those charged with governance or the management. So in this, currently you have only ISA 3000, which is your standard. There is a separate slide on that, and I'll show that to you. This is more for the companies, or if anyone is helping the company as an advisor in the BRSR readiness. So which means understanding what kind of systems are in place, identifying gaps vis-a-vis the requirement of the BRSR core in terms of policy and data requirement, which means mapping it with what the company has and what the company needs to update the system to get the data in place. Because unless and until the company has data, they won't be able to get the information or provide the information in the required formats. Highlight areas of improvement. So maybe as an advisor, you may have to highlight the areas of improvement, capacity building. So it is very, very important. So if you see this, it's something which everyone wants to understand, everyone wants to learn. Because as of now, the focus was more on that the sustainability teams might be looking into it, but But now the expectation is anything which is important, which requires assurance, should have the buy-in of the board of directors, or the audit committee. Data management, collection of relevant data for BRSR, including core indicators. Now, this is something important from the assurance aspect. So, so in terms of the important elements of the assurance, the assurance provider have to keep in mind that there are a specific requirement in the assurance standard. And while talking, while determining and planning the engagement, so one is the concept of materiality. So the concept of materiality is in the financial statement audit, it is also there. So the practitioner has to determine the materiality. Now, it's not as simple as you have in the financial statement audit. The reason being here, you're dealing with different set of KPIs. Now, most of the KPIs are quantitative in nature. And therefore, you have to understand that the KPIs, the materiality may be different for each of the KPI. So which means you may have a particular materiality for GHG emission. You may have a different materiality for your water consumption. So therefore, materiality becomes very, very important. Second comes on the work of an expert. You may have to hire an engineer, or you may have to engage an expert for your GHG emission. But if you yourself are an expert and you can very well measure the GHG emission, you may have to take a help from the assurance provider to understand the work required to be done for reasonable assurance. So, for example, testing of internal controls, testing of systems, or performing the walkthrough. So it all depends who is performing what, and whether one has that assurance or the expertise within that particular firm or the organization, and if not, whether any outside expertise is required. So this is also being dealt within ISA 3000. Whatever work is being done should be adequately documented. And the reason being, even if you're doing a limited assurance, voluntary limited assurance, or if you're doing a reasonable assurance, because this is going to be the regulated work, SEBI has mandated, and therefore it is very, very important. Any documentation, any work which is being done should be documented. And this is on the planning, the engagement. And yeah, so this I have already covered largely slide. Yeah. So this is how the assurance report looks like. So this is the contents of a reasonable assurance report, which is there in your, which is largely followed in ISA 3000. Want to highlight the reporting format is not there in ISA 3000, the International Standard on Assurance Engagement, but there is a guidance which is called extended business reporting, in which the format is there. So, so largely the reports are issued in this format, starting with the title, the engaging party, which means the board or the shareholders who have appointed the assurance provider, reasonable assurance opinion, and talking about the management responsibility or it is responsibility. And I'll just go to so this is how the report looks like. So I wanted to show you how the report looks like. So this is, I've removed the name for the purpose of for the confidentiality. But if you see, this is how the report starts. There's a published report, limited assurance report, starting from the members and board of directors of the company. And then what is the subject matter? So what are the KPIs on which assurance is being given? So if the assurance is being given on the BRSR core, then it has to be written that the BRSR core is something which are included in the BRSR report. And the criteria is being guidance note on BRSR format or the whatever SEBI has issued. Management is responsible for preparation of the entire information. Any assurance provider who will be providing assurance under the SEBI regulation will have to be independent in accordance with and there's a requirement of the standard also that the assurance provider will have to be independent. The assurance provider will have to comply with the quality control requirement, which is at least as demanding as the international standard on quality management. And accordingly, will have to maintain the comprehensive system of quality control. And then the assurance provider will have to give the responsibility. Anything for which the assurance is not being given has to be excluded. So you also have there is an option, you can include a paragraph in the report to clearly call out what has not been done. And then the restriction on use, so whether it is required to be, whether it can be published on the website of the company or whether it is a restricted use report. So yeah, this I think we can skip. This is largely on the fact that I just wanted to highlight that there's a huge difference in terms of work effort between limited assurance and reasonable assurance. So till now, till March 2023, most of the companies you will see were getting limited assurance on a voluntary basis, but now reasonable assurance is mandatory. In reasonable assurance, the procedure have to be performed in greater detail. And if you see the opinion, so reasonable assurance is a positive assurance, so in which you will clearly say that in our opinion, the KPIs for the reporting period or the BRSR core for the reporting period have been prepared in all material respect in accordance with the applicable criteria issued by SEBI. So which means reasonable assurance is a much higher level of assurance, and it should be demonstrated through the work performed, and which should be adequately documented. This is just for your reference. So if anybody is interested in terms of how assurance is being given on global at the global level, so you can have a look at this study. So International Federation of Accountant has performed annual benchmarking study on global practices in sustainability disclosures and its assurance for 3 consecutive years, 19, 20, and 21. For 2021, a study of 1350 companies across 21 jurisdictions was done. So if you see 1,283 of 1350 companies reported ESG information in 2021. SASB standard, which is now part of your International Standard Sustainability Standards Board, ISSB, and the TCFD framework has increased significantly. So globally, you will see that a lot of framework is still being evolving. So like ISSB has issued 2 standards, which are like your equivalent to your IFRS, which is on the reporting standards, the disclosure standards. So like in India, you have the BRSR. Globally, you have the ISSB. You have the TCFD, which is also now being revised, which will be with the revisions. And then in terms of assurance, you will see the assurance is also increasing over a period of time. And if you see in 2021, 80% of the assurance engagement resulted in limited assurance report. Only 7% have resulted in reasonable level of assurance. So I think this is something very important to see the assurance trend, and there's a very interesting publication which is available on the website, IFEC website, which you can have a look. If I just highlight few of the challenges before I move to the exposure draft of the ISSA 5000. So the companies have to gear up for the extensive data coverage with assurance requirement. So if you look at the entire BRSR, they have approximately 145 total indicators, extensively covering quantitative and qualitative KPIs. BRSR core framework requires reasonable assurance for limited set of indicators. It requires cross-functional collaboration and data management. So if you look at the data, it is not something which a particular function or a team can generate. It requires collaboration across departments such as HR, EHS, IT, R&D, purchase, operations. And obviously, there's an increase in performance expectations. So BRSR is pushing companies to move from doing no harm to contributing proactively for a positive change. This will result in increased expectation from shareholder for enhanced ESG performance. So this is the way forward for the assurance provider. So for you, if you're an assurance provider, you will have to understand the regulations, the subject matter, the BRSR, what kind of standard and the framework is being followed, what is the difference between limited and reasonable assurance, understand the additional work and effort. And you can refer to the existing assurance reports in public domain. Consider involving experts wherever required. Think about that the BRSR requires information for more than a year, and therefore you may have to look at the comparative information. And if not, please mention that in the report clearly that you have not seen the comparative information. And if there's some information missing, then think about how to bring it out in the report. And way forward for the, so I think this is, we have already discussed. Yeah. On the global updates relating to sustainability. So this is a largely one slide on the some of the key development, and there are more developments to this. So IFRS, the international standards have been issued. 2 IFRS sustainability disclosure standards have been issued. The first one is S1, General Requirement for Disclosure of Sustainability Related Climate in Related Financial Information, which is about the all sustainability related financial information. And then you have a separate dedicated standard on the climate-related disclosure. These standards are effective for annual reporting periods beginning on after 1st January 24. So whichever country or the jurisdiction have adopted these standards, they have already started complying with it. Then you have the European standard, which is again very huge. They have issued somewhere 12 ESRS standard, which are applicable across Europe. And they have also been, in the process of issuing, localizing the assurance standard. So these are also very vast. So they have the ESRS 1, 2, so separate standard on climate, separate standard on the other sustainability information. On the assurance side, the IAASB, which is the body for issuing the international standards on the assurance, they have issued exposure drafts of the ISSA 5000. So next few slides are dedicated to this ISSA 5000, and I'll cover in detail. And then you have the California climate disclosure laws. So on 7th October 2023, California enacted two climate disclosure laws that apply to both public and private entities that do business in the state. So the overall objective of to give you an idea that a lot is happening at the global front. It is very important to keep yourself updated if you're really interested in this subject in whichever capacity, whether you are working for the company, whether you are helping the company as a advisor, whether you are an insurance provider. It is very important for you to keep yourself updated about what kind of developments are happening across the globe. And these next few slides are on the exposure draft of the ISSA 5000. And if I thought maybe 10 minutes we can spend here before we take up questions. This is the first kind of its standard, which is issued by the final standard is not being issued yet. It is an exposure draft. The exposure draft has been issued on the International Standard on Sustainability Assurance, General Requirement for Sustainability Assurance, to deal with assurance engagement on sustainability information. So it includes this standard consider the existing requirement of the ISA 3000 and the 3410. 3410 is on greenhouse gas emission. It also have a concept from some of the international standards in auditing, for example, group audit. For example, reporting. Some of the aspects have been borrowed from the international standards in auditing. As I mentioned in one of the earlier slides, they have reviewed the EER guidance, which is there to, some of the materials which have been included in the ED, and some of the priority areas which are a key focus of the exposure drafts. So comments on ED were due by 1st December. They've already been in public domain. You can check. You can see various comment letters. More than 150 comment letters have been received by the IAASB, and they are working on this. The final standard is expected to be issued between September to December 2024. So some of the key highlights of the exposure draft, and this is one standard which can be used for any kind of sustainability information on which assurance has to be given. This is profession agnostic. Any assurance provider can use this standard provided you comply with all the requirement of this standard. So it addresses the entirety of a sustainability assurance engagement from acceptance of continuous to reporting. It applies to all assurance engagement sustainability information, except when the practitioner is providing a separate conclusion on a greenhouse gas statement. So if you are providing a separate conclusion on a greenhouse gas statement, you will have to comply with ISA 3410. It can be applied to all kinds of topics, like if you're only providing assurance on environmental matters, let's say on a selected KPI, then it can be applied. And then 3410 will be applicable to GHG's statement. This is very, very important. As I highlighted in one of the slides, any assurance provider who will be providing assurance by using these standards will have to comply with the International Code of Ethics, which is your ISBA Code of Ethics. In fact, today, the ISBA has issued the exposure draft for the independent standard for the sustainability assurance engagement. So maybe in the next 1 to 2 years, that standard will also be finalized. So as of now, the assurance provider will have to comply with the International Code of Ethics, but now there is going to be a separate code of ethics for the sustainability assurance engagement, which is also profession agnostic. And then the quality control requirement. So ISQM is the international standard on quality control requirement, so which has to be followed by any assurance provider. It is framework neutral, so it is not recommending any framework. So for example, it can be used for your Indian BRSR. It can be used for your international standard IFRS S1, S2. It can be used for GRI. It can be used even for ESRS. So it is framework neutral. You can give a limited assurance or a reasonable assurance. It is profession agnostic. So if anybody is interested, you can go through the explanatory memorandum. You can read how the process has been, how the standard has been developed. So it is intended to be used by both professional accountant as well as non-professional accountant, assurance practitioner. Materiality, there's a lot of guidance on materiality. So you can have a look at the financial materiality, impact materiality, double materiality. So they have also issued FAQ post issuance of the ED. So as I mentioned, this is not very straightforward. Your materiality can be different for your different KPIs. Sustainability information, information about sustainability matters. They have also captured the concept of practitioner's expert. So you can use your internal expert, which means you can hire a person which is part of your team, or you can take a help from an external expert, which is not part of your team. Then the management can also take a help of the expert for preparation of the sustainability information. Other information, I think I'll cover it briefly. Other information is something which is over and above, information which is part of your annual report. So the requirement in the exposure draft is that the assurance provider should read every other information to identify if there is any inconsistency in the BRSR report and the other report published. Let's say in the board report or in the financial statement, they are making a statement about reduction of the carbon footprint, right? However, that information is not in line with what has been presented in the BRSR report. So if there is any inconsistency, you need to point it out and have a discussion with the management. It also has a guidance on the forward-looking information because there is a lot in the sustainability word you will have to talk about. The companies talk about the what is the impact of the climate change, how it is being measured, and what kind of estimates are being made. Assurance report. So there is a very detailed guidance on the assurance report, and they give you very detailed example also. So one peculiar thing, they have also given a example of a unmodified report with reasonable and limited assurance reports. So let's say a company wants reasonable assurance on a particular set of KPI and a limited assurance on a particular set of KPI. The exposure draft acknowledges that a combined report, which means one report can be given in this case. So in nutshell, ED, the exposure draft 5000 is a very, very comprehensive standard, very lengthy standard, but very important standard. There is not now what is not there. The standard does not have much guidance on the group, how to perform assurance provider in case of a group engagement when you are providing, let's say, assurance on the consolidated BRSR. What will happen once the value chain entities assurance requirement will trigger in, or how to deal with the in such situations. Besides that, I think that there are many other areas which are being debated, discussed by the IAASB basis a comment letter. But I think as of now, if I just talk about some of the, before I end up the session and, take up the question, it's more about one needs to think about in terms of the companies. Companies need to gear up in terms of the preparation readiness. So read the BRSR report and talk to the specialist, understand what are the key requirements, where the data is missing, how the data can be collated, and how the data can be measured. When it comes to assurance provider, it is important to understand what kind of what kind of systems to be checked. So what exactly you need. So do you need a detailed record, access to the record, or understand the company? So like for example, the safety. You will have to talk about the safety features or the safety features established or the policies established by the companies. So you need to obtain an understanding what kind of safety measures have been implemented by the company, how many safety incidences have been reported, and what is the step taken by the company. Obviously, you will ask for a lot of evidence around it from the management, and therefore there is a need for the, have that readiness. So I think that's all from me in terms of the presentation, but I'm happy to take up the questions and if anyone wants to share anything. Let me have a look at the...
Deepa ma'am, are you able to hear me?
Yes, you're clear.
So you were referring to, in one of the slides, you were referring to where you can get the top 1,000 listed companies. Just like to add that NSE and BSE have published a list of companies as on every financial year, like 31st March 23.
Yeah.
There is a list.
Yeah.
But what would happen is that NSE gives as per the companies which are listed with NSE, and BSE gives companies which are listed as per their BSE. So there may be some companies which may figure in one and may not figure in the other. But once it figures in any one of these, the requirements are applicable. So this is just to supplement whatever you have covered.
No, very important point, and thanks for clarifying. This is very important. So as you rightly explained, that one has to look at both the list, and once it's covered, then it's applicable.
And once it is covered, it is going to be covered year on year.
Year on year. So that's why I said SEBI has issued a consultation paper to clarify all these aspects. But every year you will have to look at the top, how the listed company for the disclosure, and for assurance you will have to see 150, 250, 500, and 1000.
And when it comes to value chain, it talks of the BRSR core talks about 75% upstream and 75% downstream.
Yeah.
Just to give an idea to ourselves, suppose there is a bank for whom we are going to do a core assurance. So now 75% of the customers, and it is supposed to cover to the extent it is connected to the business of the bank. So now suppose there is a borrower. There are some borrowers who are not listed, but who are MSME kind of companies, which are large borrowers for the bank. Now, what is the approach which will be taken by the bank? So when we go for extension of in 24, 25, how do we take up this BRSR core assurance? That's the point. You would like to add something on that?
No, I agree. Even this is something which is being debated, and guidance is being prepared by one of the group constituted by SEBI. So first, the guidance is being prepared on the disclosure aspects. So how the company should get the information, and then the assurance aspect will be covered in the assurance standard, which I'm referring to, because this is something beyond the control of the company. So probably the guidance should be, and again, I'm just saying that the guidance will be expected soon. But if you ask my view, ideally it should be, one, the assurance providers should be allowed to rely on the other assurance providers' work, who could be the assurance provider for such value chain entity. Two, if they are required to perform assurance work, then they will have to engage through the management to understand those suppliers and customers, and get into, connect with them.
And lastly, I have one more question. Like, what is the extent to which you can rely on management representation in the case of reasonable assurance?
So you will apply the same principle what is there in the other assurance. So management representation is not evidence to be relied on only, or let me put it like this, it is not the only evidence. So it is not substantive enough to give a reasonable assurance. So you need to have the independent evidence through performance of the procedure, checking underlying records, looking at the system.
Right. So at the most, it may be corroborative.
Yes. That can only be corroborative, and you need to obtain it before you issue the assurance report, but you cannot issue anything basis of management representation alone.
Yes, thanks, ma'am. Thanks for that. Others may have some questions.
Thanks. Yeah. Anyone else has a question or want to share your perspective? I'm reading, what is eligibility of ESG audit firm and which institute will regulate it? Very good question. So I think eligibility is there in the SEBI circular. The assurance provider will be selected by the board. It is profession agnostic. It is nowhere written that, the person has to be qualified but what I understand is, from the basis of what, being part of that group, is that SEBI may come out with a guidance around it, how to regulate it, how it is going to be monitored, and what is the minimum criteria which needs to be considered by the board when it is appointing an assurance provider. So as of now, if you ask me, you will have to look at the SEBI circular 13 July, dated 13 July, and the FAQs issued on 7th August. Yeah. Those are two things which you can have a look. So So I think that's all from my side. So maybe
Just one point.
yeah.
You had talked about some forward-looking statements.
Yes, yes.
Now, with respect to any of these parameters, if there is any forward-looking statement given by in the
Management.
BRSR report saying we intend to do something like this, and if in the next 2 years our GHG gas emission will be reduced by 20, we are targeting to reduce by 20%. So, in such cases, since it forms part of our core assurance report, I
Yeah.
think we have to give a similar comment to what we give in this thing, that in forward-looking statements, we do not express any opinion or something, right?
Yeah, because if we do not have a basis, then we will have to call it out. And it's a very important point in any of the information where you are not able to get sufficient evidence from the management. Let's say the management cannot demonstrate it through the measures taken, because if it's just a statement, you cannot vouch for its accuracy. However, if the company is taking steps to reduce its carbon footprint or supporting that estimate, then probably you can consider. But wherever you do not have evidence, you do not vouch for it, then you will have to call it out in the report more as a scope limitation. So I think a scope limitation, you can expect more and more modification of the scope limitation in the first year, because every company may not be geared up with this much information.
And then you had pointed out materiality, financial materiality, and impact materiality. So
Yeah.
that's a very interesting concept. Can you give some example or some greater clarity to impact materiality? Because there may be a scenario where there may not be a financial materiality, but impact materiality may be there.
Yeah, so that is very explained and detailed in the exposure draft, but just in very simply, if I need to explain how the company is impacted by the sustainability KPIs, by the climate, by the outside world. So how the company is impacted by this ESG, and what is the impact of the company on this? So how the company is impacting, let's say, the environment or the water, how the company is impacting and how these factors are impacting the company. So this is called impact materiality, and you can have a look at the IASB has issued the FAQs also on materiality, specifically on materiality on EDI SSA 5000, in which they explain. Yeah.
Thanks, ma'am. There may be many more queries, any more this thing.
Yeah.
So I hope you'll be sharing your presentation.
Yeah.
To the members.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and Deepa madam, when we are most of the companies are having other frameworks like integrated reporting or GRI reporting. So those with their works, how they need to align with reference to this BRSR core or other frameworks. Is there any standard guidance from SEBI? Is there anywhere we can look at for the transitioning from one framework to this BSR, or in an integrated way these can be complied?
This is again a very good question as well as a suggestion. Nowhere there is any transition or guide available or anything. But the all I can understand, GRI was used as a basis. So, but one has to read and go through. So there is no guidance wherein you can refer to the transition or the connect between the two.
Okay, but as such, from SEBI, nowhere it is mentioned, right?
Yeah, nowhere it is mentioned.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you very much for your participation. And I think this is a very wider topic and it can be debated for hours. But I'm sure you will have more questions, especially when you will be engaging with the companies for this kind of work. So good luck and thank you.
Thank you so much, Deepa ma'am, for such a nice session and the presentation, ma'am. Thank you very much once again.
Yeah.
And thanks to all participants for on behalf of ICMAI SAO. I thanks all the participants for joining this session. So, ma'am, could you please share your PPT in the chat box or otherwise through the email, so we can just pass it on to the participants. Yeah. Sure, ma'am.
Thank you.
So with this, we have completed our session. So thank you so much for joining this session.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.